Greetings from sunny Preston. I feel like we've had your Cornish weather here the last few weeks. It's been absolutely glorious. I mean, I hope you guys have had it as well. I've had nice weather and that you're all doing okay as we move into week 127 or whatever it is of 2020. Today I wanted to share with you one of the stories in the Gospels, so stories about Jesus when he walked on this earth, because I find it fascinating the different ways that he interacted with people. There are so many different and varied stories about him, and the one I'm going to share with you today relates to what I went to university to study, and that was deaf studies. So it was the study of people who couldn't hear properly, and the way that they adapt to the world around them, the way that sometimes they form their own communities and certainly their own language and way of communicating with each other and to the rest of the world. It's so much more than just reading something instead of hearing it. It's about sign language, it's about processing things in a different way, and it absolutely fascinated me. And during that year I remember coming to this story in the Bible and it blew me away because I read it with fresh eyes because of what I was reading every day at university, and it's from Mark 7 verses 31 to 35. It says, "Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spat and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, 'Ephphatha,' which means, 'be opened.' And at this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly." It's amazing hearing that story of how God released somebody from their deafness. But what really impacted me, reading it as someone who was studying deaf people and how they see the world, was the series of steps that Jesus goes through with this man. And very often when people are deaf, the way that they see things visually, the way that they process the world visually, means there can be a lot of stuff going on that they're having to process much faster than if we have this additional sense of hearing. Also, sometimes if you have some residual hearing but not enough to hear language, noise and chaos that goes on in crowds can be really discombobulating. So the fact that Jesus takes this man and he draws him to one side, it really shows that Jesus gets what it's like to be in this man's shoes. He removes him from distraction first, and then he begins to communicate with him in a form of sign language. He points to the guy's ears as if to say, "I know what the issue is here." And then he spits as if to say, "And I'm going to get rid of it. This is something that you had in you and it's now going to be gone." And he points to the man's mouth as well. So he's using sign language. And then he uses this word, "be opened." But isn't it incredible? The Bible doesn't just say and translated, into the Greek and then into the Latin and then into the English. The Bible retains this, I think it's an Aramaic word, Ephphatha. And I wonder if that is, if you look at someone's mouth when they're saying that word, if it was the equivalent of "be healed" or "be opened." It's not a very distinctive way of lip reading that, but those words, Ephphatha, it's really clear, isn't it? And I think the fact that the Bible retains that particular word shows that Jesus was making it really clear to the man, communicating to him, this is what's about to happen. And then we see this incredible miracle of this man being healed completely, being able to talk and speak plainly. And presumably, if he'd been born deaf, it would have taken him a while to learn this language, but it was instant and it came like that. And I think this is what we get from this story, is that Jesus knows exactly what is going on in the heart of every single one of us. He knows what our difficulties are and our struggles. He knows the things that are overwhelming us about the situations around us, and he knows the difficulties that we have. And he didn't have a one-size-fits-all approach to when he healed people, when he connected with them. And he could have done, because the gift that he was giving was enough on its own. But he always went one step further. He called the short man down from the tree. He turned to the woman that touched him. And he took time with this deaf guy to explain to him, first of all, what was going to happen. And I want to remind us, each of us, that at the minute, even though we're living in this global situation where any one of us can identify people that are much worse off than us, people who are going through much more difficult circumstances than us living in a country like we do, in a situation like we do, that we still don't need to say, oh, God's too busy, or God's got enough to do, or God doesn't work that way. But that God treats every single one of us as a complete individual. And he knows exactly what we need. And your relationship with God is completely unique. God wants to draw you to one side and communicate with you in a way that's very different to how he wants to communicate with the people around you. He sees you, he knows you, and he wants to speak into your life and speak over your life to release things from you, just like he did with this deaf man. And you are no less important to him than this guy here or somebody across the world in a worse situation than you are. So be reassured, church, that God sees you and he knows you, and take time this week to spend time with him, seeking his heart, finding out what specifically does he want to say to you, what does he want to do for you, and what is he asking you to do in this time. Be blessed, church, as you walk with God, and it's amazing to be with you today.